Welcome to episode 9 of John's Voice. I want to start this one off by kind of doubling back a little bit and talking about something that I talked about on the previous episodes about speaking in tongues and languages. I thought a lot about language has such a limitation because it's just the nature of what words really are. I mean, you don't come into this world speaking any language. You learn the language, and yet so much of communication, even in psychology, it says that that of a conversation, it's 80% nonverbal, 20% is verbal. So you lose a lot just in language alone, and you can really see that even when you compare the 80% is body language and how something is interpreted based off of what you see when someone speaks. And so when you talk about communication and you talk about, the words, what you're really always trying to do is you're trying to find the right words that can express what the overall feeling is. And it seems like that's where the rub always happens. That's where we tend to think that someone is not being genuine with us based off of the things that they say. And I'll give you an example of this. The limitation that words come in, just as we were talking about in one of the previous episodes about love and the different types of love. And when you're trying to express it to someone and that's all you can say, is that I love you. And I don't know, I found myself many times wishing that there was something more that we could do in communication with one another. And I thought so long and hard about our words as important as we have placed them. And I would say, yes, to a certain degree, words are extremely important, which is why I think it's important that we have an extensive vocabulary. I think it's important for us to learn how to express ourselves and finding meaningful words that stir the conversation and bring out what those emotions are. But I thought so long and hard about this debate that happens of, the Protestants who hang on every word written in the Bible, and that whole thing of where, growing up in the South, there was a time where if you said any other Bible other than the King James Version, it would be just completely disregarded, that it's only that version. And then there's the atheist view that disregards every single word that's written, as though it is some form of mystical nonsense. And that too is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because all of what we know and all of what we have learned is what we have read or experienced. And yet that's really what it boils down to, is why is it that when we have an experience and we express it into words, that we immediately disregard the experience and then we hold on to the words. When Jesus was here and he physically spoke and he physically touched people's lives, when all of that stuff became written down, we immediately rejected the experience of Jesus and we merely held on to the words. And I even think that there's an issue because of what I stated before. John in the beginning starts out with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it made me think long and hard about what is this word? Like, of course we're using the English vernacular when we're saying this, but you know, it had me going back and forth of, was this word a written word? Was it the act of being spoken? And that, I kind of stayed right there with that sentiment that, you know, you go to Genesis and you read that he spoke all of this into existence. He merely said that something was good, saw that it was good, and it was good. But he spoke it. The very first thing, let there be light. So as I kind of stayed with that theme, I thought about people talking when I've heard people say, you know, Jesus or God spoke to them. And the atheist in me always rejected the notion of this speaking. And even when I tell you that, I will also tell you that I happen to notice there were times in my life where, you know, especially when you lose someone close to you, there are these moments, and it's, here I am again with the limitation of words, of where I got into a vehicle after my dad had died, and I get into a vehicle and I hear a song come on, and it was on the radio, and it was a song that my dad loved, and I found it to be comforting. I found it bringing these coincidental questions of, how is this possible that I sit down and I hear this, and I hear it right at this time when I'm thinking about him the most, and a lot of the doubting, it just played so hard, because when you have no version of God to relate to, then you disregard these types of experiences, and yet we all have these experiences. Which brings me to what this is today. I thought long and hard about my own father. And we recently, you know, had a tragedy in our family. And, you know, my brother-in-law, he passed away recently, and he left behind 3 children. And for any of you who've ever lost your father, you know this feeling. It is one of the worst. I can't speak for losing a mother yet, but I can imagine after losing my father. And something unlocked, something came through when I sat down and I started to think about, what message did I want to give to my children? And I wrote a message from a father. And so just know that when you hear me say that I felt God speak to me, I mean it in the sense of not a spoken word, but a real sense of connection or communion. The letter goes like this. My child, you were created in love. It was a beautiful and fear-filled surprise. Our lives have not been the same since. Your mother and I both, after sharing the gift of love together, intertwining my life with her life, were immediately facing our greatest fears. Now trust me on this one. There is not a more difficult job on the face of this earth, and so little instructions on how to do it well. You know, we require a period of instruction, a written test and evaluation to drive a vehicle. You have to have a license to drive a car, but to be a parent, you're simply equipped with this capability And no matter how experienced or inexperienced you are, if you engage in the life-creating steps with the gender opposite of yours, it will eventually lead to this result. To be fair, there is nothing on this earth that can compare with watching the love that you share with another person become a living and breathing being. Which is why sometimes people are overcome with fear and they run away at this prospect. I wish to explain why. You see, your mother was so afraid when she found out that she was pregnant. Some of the first thought that she had was, can I do this? Fortunately for you, if you're hearing this message, she resolved that she could. Sadly, many other mothers have resolved otherwise, and those children, they will not get to hear this message. But my child, your mother was then worried about her body. What will this do to me? What should I be eating? How will I sleep? On my side? I hate to sleep on my side. What about medical problems? Oh my God, what is my family medical history? And stretch marks? What am I going to look like? How bad is this nausea and this back pain and this constipation going to be? When do I start getting sick? Will it be every morning? There was a myriad of questions that she had to try to resolve. Then finally, how will the dad react when he finds out? How will the father of this child react? You see, she was connected to you from the very beginning. That will always be an enigma to us fathers, as we just cannot even start to imagine a life growing inside of us. Trust me when I tell you this, women are the most beautiful of all the created beings for this ability. They are the gateway to life itself. Out of all the people you meet on the road in life, you will only ever get one of these. Just know that when I chose her, the possibility of you was a driving factor in that decision. I saw things in her that were better than the things that I saw in myself. She brought a balance into my life because her strengths were all of my weaknesses, and I only hoped that I was the same for her. We both had hoped that you would embody the best of us both, but we will look a little closer at that a little later. Now, my fear, the father's fears, are not as physically connected as your mother's were. My first fears were security fears. Would I be able to protect and provide for all of us? Then came the performance fears. Can I handle all of your mom's needs during this time? Then I was struck with paternity fears. This is a monumental task. It is a God-like quality. We have created a person. I mean, I have a hard enough time managing myself. Now there's a person who's going to depend on me for life, which in turn awoke my mortality fear. I don't have the right to die anymore. You see, this person we've created is going to need me. That led to my fear then for both your mom and your health. What is my family history like? Will any of the bad things in my family be found in you? Which then brought about my relationship fear. What if your mom doesn't feel that I'm adequate to meet her needs? And what if she loves this new person more than me and decides that it would be best if I were not in the picture? There was also the fear of women's medicine. When I saw all of the equipment, the stirrups, the examining room, the delivery room, all of these were designed to make women comfortable, but not men. I wasn't sure what my role was going to be other than a cheerleader or whatever role your mom wanted me to play, but all I could do was comfort and watch. Even after addressing all of these fears, here you were in our lives. For me personally, the both of you, as we just didn't create one person, we created two, which doubled all the previous fears for both of us. And don't think I'm slighting you either, son, but your sisters were first. But when I first held you in my hand, God, you were so tiny. I had never felt a connection to any other human being like this on the face of this earth. Ready or not, here you were. And your mom, when she held you at first, you were still connected to her by this umbilical cord. When you breathed your first breath, you were connected to your mom. She had already been connected to you before, but I got to behold what an amazing creature we really are. When I saw you in her arms and still connected to her, all of those original fears melted away. When I felt your little beating heart in my hand, for a brief moment, I felt the hand of God as I came to realize that I was now someone's father. When they let us bring you home, I couldn't imagine that they even handed you to us, along with the bill, and allowed us to leave with your little life entrusted to us. Your mom rode in the back seat for the first time with you buckled in. And I stared at every car as though it was a threat to your life. I realized how dangerous this world was. And I set about to observing every traffic law, and I was yelling at people to be careful because we had you on board. Now, we both agreed that protecting you was a pretty important undertaking. How we would do that? I can tell you that has been an ongoing topic with the two of us since that day. I'll let you know if we ever get that settled, because we never really seem to agree with what that should look like. I know you're already aware, as you seem to know who to ask for what thing, at which time, depending on what thing it is that you're asking. Like I already told you, we were not given a license or a test, just a bill, and allowed to leave. I do think it's important to let you know, though, your mom knew exactly what you needed even before you spoke your first word. She could hear you cry and immediately knew how to soothe you. I was just the getter of things and the carrier of things. I also had a lot to learn in how to comfort you the way she did. You see, she was a natural, and I was afraid I would mess things up. How your mom knew how to change your diaper, get you to sleep, it was amazing to watch. That connection that you guys had was so spiritual to watch. How we both worried about you. We worked so hard to get you to talk. There was this secret competition to get you to say either mom or dad first. We started to get the hang of the 3 a.m. feedings, crying all hours of the day and night, changing diapers, sometimes in rapid succession, until one day you finally began walking and talking. And then the new fears began. God, you were into everything. You explored places and locations all over the house with no sense of danger. We had plugged in little socket protectors into outlets. We moved all the dangerous chemicals out of your reach. We locked cabinets. We tried to move all the furniture with the sharp and pointed ends, and still you managed to get past these defenses. God, you put everything into your mouth. I found you once eating an onion like an apple. Still, with all of these things in place, you still fell, you skinned your knees, you bumped your head, you knocked over many things, you almost burned down the house. We had to keep an eye on you all the time. We were so afraid that we might fail at keeping you safe. Now, speaking, on the other hand, became something that was a blessing and a curse. God, you were so precious with how you would say things. And when you finally said, I love you, oh, did our hearts melt. You would learn a new word and you would repeat it. Like, no. You would say that for everything, when you learn that word, baby, come here. No. Baby, get down from there. No. Time for bed. No. Give that to me. No. You would laugh and run off saying, no, no, no. Then there were the words you were not supposed to say. I could not understand how it was that I could say a sentence, and out of all the words I'd said, you somehow knew what the bad word was. Someone could cut me off in traffic. I would respond in anger with a tirade about their driving skills, and yet out of all the words that I said, the one curse word is the one you would repeat. God, you got me into so much trouble. Because not only did you learn your new word, you would repeat your new word. And somehow everyone looked at me when you did. Another word that became so problematic was why. God, you asked this one all the time. No matter what explanation we would give you, you still wanted to know why. You made me examine what I knew and search for greater answers until finally I would just have to say, well, because I said so. When what I was really trying to say is that either I didn't know all of the reasons why, or I just needed you to trust me. I need you to know that your inquisitive nature does not stop. You just start to seek these answers of why for yourself. Then it came time to expose you to education. We were so intent on making sure that we got this one right. We wanted an environment that was safe and still allowed you to grow intellectually. I have never wanted you to be a clone of me. In fact, most of the issues we have, because you need to understand I've been your age before, I've already lived and learned and made tons of mistakes. All I've ever really done is try to impart to you the lessons that I have learned so that you didn't make the same mistakes that I did. I knew that you were scared your first day of school because I was, and so was your mom. Anytime we face an unknown situation, fear does seem to be the most logical response. However, I was trying to reassure you that we knew what that was like. Believe me, your tears and your pain were not foreign to us. We just knew that it would be okay. You quickly adjusted and you started to tell us about all of the new friends you were making. You then cried when you got moved to your next class and all of your friends were not in the same class. You cried because you had to go to school. You cried when the school year was over. You cried because all your friends were not with you the next year. How you wanted everything to stay the same. This also never changes as you get older. Change seems to be the only constant in our universe. I know that because of how our relationship changed the older you got. You once asked me about everything, and then all of a sudden you blew out the candles on that 13th birthday cake, and somehow my position changed. Your position with me didn't. I really missed how you wanted to tell me everything, and now somehow I just became an advisor. I'll also tell you that I anticipated that this would happen. As I told you, I too was once 13 years old. I thought that somehow being, quote, unquote, better than my parents, I was going to correct all of those things that I'm sure that they'd gotten wrong. And I was going to get it right. Oddly enough, I started to understand my parents more through all of this. As I told you before, I never claimed to have all the answers. All of your rebellion really did was make me realize just how much hell I had put my own parents through. I resolved that I would do what they did for me. Just love you through it, mistakes and all. Now, I always secretly wished that you would just snap out of it and realize that I have never wanted to see you get hurt. I had already survived the tragedy of teenage years. I listened to friends that challenged authority, got myself in loads of trouble, and it would have been easily avoided if I would have just have listened. And incidentally, those things that I get on to you about, you remember how the idea was that you would be the best of both your mother and I? Turns out, most of the parts about myself that I didn't like, yeah, I recognize those in you. Which seems to fuel most of our debates. It seems that teenage birthday cake unlocks all of these negative traits that both your mother and I have. And sadly, the time that you need to really listen to us the most is when you will present to us our most defiant traits. We don't know how to communicate through those either, as we haven't addressed those issues in ourselves either. But what I would like you to know is that we're not mad at you as much as we are mad at ourselves. Our fears on this one have come true. These are really turbulent times. You see, your mind and your body have started to mature. Sometimes the body can be faster to mature than the mind does. Sometimes it's vice versa. Sadly, a mature body and an immature mind is a dangerous combination. I already told you, engaging in the life-creating steps with the gender opposite of yours and how it eventually leads to a result. If you think being a teenager is hard and you feel isolated and alone, you cannot fathom being a parent during that time. I've seen it firsthand, how difficult it is to be a parent. Your mother and I fortunately waited 10 years into our marriage before we brought you into the equation. If we would have done so in our youth, I cannot imagine how life would have been for you. Luckily, for you, we were deliberate in our family planning. We took the time to learn each other, really examine each other, and we created a dynamic team to be here for you. You'll find that so many people don't have that experience. You seem to be so obsessed with this idea of life being fair. I'm going to ask you to trust me on this one. Life just is not fair. Equal opportunities does not guarantee an equal result. Although I still stand by what I taught you when you were a toddler. You do good, you get good. You do bad, you get bad. That's about as fair as it gets. You will notice, however, sometimes bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. You will definitely become frustrated as this can and will happen to you. I want to caution you about becoming bitter during these times. I have to share this information with you, so hopefully you'll understand where I learned this from. Just because you're angry, don't mean you're right. My child, what's right is what's left after you do everything else wrong. Now this one I know firsthand. I've been wrong about many things. Pride becomes this stumbling block when you realize that you were wrong. Admitting that you were is real courage. I know you may not believe this, but I've been wrong before. I just want you to know that I always have had the best of intentions for you. Nothing that I have ever asked you to do was for my benefit. Peace of mind, maybe. But you were always the forefront of all the things we didn't agree on. Which is why I'm giving you this message now. My child, I failed you. I gave you all the information I had at the time. I was so intent on providing you physical protection and mental well-being that we never really connected on spiritual health. I didn't have any to share. I was spiritually bankrupt. Sure, I taught you the basics of life, right and wrong, emotional intelligence, health and welfare. But I've never been in touch with my own soul. Although those chords of love that you were striking within me were from a different place altogether. It was still foreign to me. I noticed that no matter how angry or upset I was with you, I could never stop loving you. I noticed that when you would do things that I'd asked you not to do, I was always ready to forgive you and start anew every time. And when you would get hurt and you would come crying to me because you had done something and now you were suffering the consequences, I always treated those wounds with love. I reinforced why I had told you not to do those things and explained to you why I had warned you about it in the first place. Didn't I always try to kiss it and make it better eventually and send you right back out to face the next challenge? Which does bring up consequences and punishments. Simply put, every action has an equal and an opposite reaction. Punishment was how we introduced you as a child to consequences. These are not the same, by the way, even though they may seem similar. I really need you to understand this one. Do you remember when you wanted to touch the stove? Probably not. Your mom smacked your little hand. Oh, how you cried. You ran away, you threw yourself on the floor, and you screamed. Your mom had punished you, and you were so upset. You see, the punishment was only administered to help you avoid the consequences of touching the hot stove. You felt as though this was such an injustice. How could your loving and caring mom smack your little hand and deny you your inquisitive nature? She truly was loving you during that, but you just couldn't see it. You also didn't see how much it hurt her to apply that punishment. But if she would not have done so, the consequences would have been far worse. I used punishment as a tool to assist you in avoiding consequences. When you would get too close to the edge of a pool, or you were pulling on cords that were attached to large TVs above your head, I yelled at you. I wanted your attention, and I knew that if you were afraid of my yell, it might stop you from the consequences of falling into the pool or pulling the TV over on your head. Sadly, I continued to try to use punishment when you became a teenager because I had seen parents neglect this duty and watched their children suffer the consequences throughout my life. You see, consequences and punishments are fundamentally different. Punishment, or discipline as your dad calls it, is something we impose. In contrast, consequences, they flow spontaneously from the situation without us having to think up something. That's because consequences have to do with cause and effect. You see, when we break down the etymology of the word, con is a Latin word. It means with. And sequence, also Latin, it means to follow after. You see, I was willing to give you a punishment in order to assist you in avoiding the consequences. I know this may seem hard to follow, but loving someone does not mean saying yes to everything they want to do. If your mom had not have punished you for trying to touch that hot stove, the consequences would have been disastrous. You see, if we would have allowed you to live undisciplined and just allowed you to suffer the consequences, we also would have to suffer the consequences of that action as well. The law in our society has been set up to address these situations. The reason so many people confuse these two is because they can happen at the same time. You see, the law would have punished us for allowing you to touch the hot stove and not protecting you. The consequence would have been that they would have eventually taken you away from us and said that we were not protecting you. Incidentally, that's why they have a Child Protective Services, to provide for the child what the parent is failing to do or suspected of failing to do. Now, as you grew older, we started to remove the punishments from you. We allowed you to live out the consequences of those behaviors. This is where that handbook would have been really effective. I did decide, though, that there were two behaviors that I would administer immediate punishment for. These were lying and stealing. This was not negotiable in my mind, and your mother's, no matter what the consequences would be. I would give you a spanking whenever you would do either of these. Not because I was angry with you, but because of the destructive nature of that behavior. Both of these could be filed under dishonesty. Many people lie about their behavior in order to avoid punishment, or because they fear the consequences of telling the truth, or they seek to possess something that they don't deserve or they haven't earned. Both of these are detrimental to your mental health. You see, lying is cognitively depleting. It can increase the risk that people will be punished. It can threaten people's self-worth by preventing them from seeing themselves as good people. And it erodes trust in society. Simply put, lying is saying something that's not true. And no matter how much you might disagree with something, misrepresenting the facts or calling something by a different name than what it really is lying. Now, stealing has serious consequences because it hurts everyone. Stealing causes a big problem in a family when a thief is caught. Trust me, if you've ever had a thief break into your house, the main thing that you lose is security. Your house doesn't feel the same anymore. You have been violated. Store owners, they have to spend more money to protect their things, which makes the prices go up for everyone who shops. All of their paying customers now have to pay the price. Both of these two, lying and stealing, are highly destructive, both to you and to society, and they must be avoided at all costs. It's destructive to you because it fails to recognize value. Values of who you are as a person and values of worth. In all of your dealings, you must keep your integrity. If you do not have that one value, you are quite honestly worthless. The meaning behind that is that if you do not know your value, you equally don't know your worth. Henceforth, worthless. I fortunately think I've succeeded for the most part, as you're not a thief. You notice that you were never spanked as a teenager. You only suffered the consequences of losing trust. How difficult that one is to repair. Am I right? If you only knew how many times in my own life that lies and deceit either hurt me directly or someone that I loved. I promised you when you were little that I would never lie to you. I thought it was important to lead by example, and I can proudly say to you, and I hope that you will agree, I've never lied to you. That's been the hardest undertaking that I have ever done. I maintained that if you were old enough to ask the question, I owed you the truth. This is not an easy task. When you asked me at 5 years old, where did babies come from? Do you remember how I just plainly told you the truth? You remember your mom was sitting in complete apoplexy as I walked you through the differences between males and females. And you just walked away after that saying, that makes sense. My child, that's one of the most fearful things I've ever done. Because this was not done for me. I was given some made-up story about birds and bees, and I walked away from that conversation more confused than when I had asked the question. And I found out that it became much easier to communicate with you through truth, because that became my love language with you, and it always will be. So what is the truth? My child, after all of my life's experiences, I discovered that we really know very little. I think the reason for it is that we just don't know what we don't know. This quest, however, is how life proceeds. Sure, you're going to see all sorts of differences in life. Some people are tall, short, young, old, skinny, fat, white, black, all different societies, all different cultures, all different classes. Fairness is really not in the equation. All of us are just doing the best we can with the information that we have at the time. But if you examine this closely, you're going to realize that there's only two kinds of people in this world. There's parents and there's children. You're either one of them or the other. But in reality, you're both. Because every parent also has parents. Every child has parents. Some people don't have children, and sadly some children do not know their parents. There are even some that are stripped of being either because they're disregarded only as a choice. I will give you one observation on that note. Because you have life, you have a choice. It's known as free will. If you choose to end someone's life, that might be your choice, but it's not theirs. You are taking away their choice. And even if you convince yourself that you had no other choice, that statement alone suggests that there was another choice. You just didn't like it. And not liking something, it doesn't mean you're right. That's what made me want to give you this message. In pondering a lifetime, trying to make sense of life, I needed to correct a mistake I had made. The question was right in front of me this whole time. If there are only two types of people, parents and children, then which came first? Was there a parent for all of us? I'd heard so many different stories regarding a father of all of us, but I didn't really trust any of them. I mean, so many different versions. How could anyone really know? I was okay before with the prospect of there being nothing when we died. I had thought that religion was just a problem with the world. Until I met you. You see, I couldn't understand the point of living my life by all of these rules. Getting you to do your best, protecting and providing for you, seeking to make your life extraordinary, if it's all for nothing. Which made me think, if we had a Father in heaven, if such a place did exist, wouldn't he want to come down here and just let us know he was there? Turns out he did. Just as I would want to be with you if I could somehow bridge the veil between life and death. My child, I have found a way. And not just some through belief system, not some made-up belief system, but something that my Father in heaven has given to me. It's his message. It's in this message. My precious child, I've been with you your whole life. My whole life includes all of yours. You always have been a part of me, and you always will be. All of those who walked with me left you messages as well. They told you of my birth. All of the prophets had told you that I was coming before I came down from heaven. You see, that's why the Magi or the wise men followed that star to the place that I entered into your world. I had my apostles go and teach this to every corner of the world. And they did. And they still do. I established one church through these apostles. And I promised you that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. She's still with you today, just as I am. I gave you my mother when I was crucified. I said to her, "Woman, behold your son." And to my disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. I would ask you to do the same. It's because your mother intercedes for you without end. Did I not say that I present myself to you every day? Have you found me yet? When I proclaimed that unless you ate of the body and drank of my blood, that you had no life in you, this was not a symbol. If you read, you will find what I speak becomes real. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So when I told Satan that man does not live by bread alone, but from every word that comes from God, it didn't mean for you to focus only on my word, but on the bread as well. That is why I broke the bread and spoke that this was my body and my blood that would be given up for you and for many. I promised you that I would be with you always, and I did not lie. I'm still with you. I even told you that many would come in my name. What is that up to now? 45,000 denominations? All of them choosing to accept some of what I had taught while rejecting others. But I only ordained one. Some saying that my words have been distorted and that they have been told by a better someone other than who I gave authority to tell you about me. Trust me, I'm not the father of confusion. I established one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Why are you so surprised that Satan has been attacking that church? Since you no longer speak Latin, let me help you. The word Catholic came from Catholicos. It means universal. It even forms the Greek word katholu, meaning on the whole, or according to the whole. My precious child, I ordain this church on earth and in heaven. That's why it's universal. On earth, every person in the world that attends Mass attends the same Last Supper. There is only one and only ever will be one Last Supper. When you do this in memory of me, I am right there with you, just as I promised, in body, blood, and divinity. Universal also in heaven. My child, all of your ancestors who physically died believing in me are with me. Only the veil between heaven and earth separates you from them. You join with them every time you attend the Last Supper. You get so wrapped up in justifying your beliefs that you lose me in the process. I gave my apostles the ability to forgive sins. When I ascended into heaven, I told them to go and forgive sins. That whoever sins you forgive are forgiven, and whoever sins you retain are retained. Why do you doubt this? How do you imagine that they would have the ability to forgive those sins if you do not confess them? Now, you're right to notice that these men, they're flawed. Do you judge all of my church because of the actions of these men? These are not the first men to betray my teaching. Judas followed me also. Did I not give him my body as well? And did he not use his free will and forsake me? You really miss how precious this free will gift is. This is not a matter of predestination just because I know what you will choose. This freedom which you readily identified as a gift from me when you established your United States seems to elude you. Every choice you make comes with a consequence, and that's just natural law. I will not force you to obey me. That would be a dictatorship, and it wouldn't be an all-loving God. I know how many of you wish that I would just step in and fix all of these things. You also hold me responsible as if I'm a child with a magnifying glass and you're just ants. Many of the things you pray to me about are within your power to fix. Pray then for the courage to change the things that you can change. I gave my life for this. I forgive you, as you know not what you do. And when you know me, all of this will be clear to you. I'm not punishing the world as you currently think. This worldwide calamity that you see now is not from me, but the consequences of not knowing who you really are. Please stop creating these things and then disowning your own creation. You cannot change what you do not own. When you deny your creation, you disempower yourself to do anything about it. Just as your parents allowed you to go outside and play when you were a child. It was of no consequence to them what you chose to play. Whether you played tag, hide and seek, jump rope, your parents placed you in an environment that they felt was safe and allowed you to play. Sure, they cautioned you about playing dangerous games, but did that stop you from getting hurt? Was it their fault for not intervening and stopping you from what you were doing? Even when you got hurt, even after they lectured you on why you were not supposed to do that, did they not bandage your wounds and try to soothe your pain? And then when you went back outside again, was it of any consequence to them what you played? Of course not. A parent's love is unconditional. And where, pray tell, do you imagine that came from? Does that mean you cannot be disobedient? Are you not always with free will? My prodigal child, if you seek me, I will be found by you. The question is not really with whom does God talk, but who listens. I love you, and I will still be with you, always, in all ways. This is just another way. Love always, your Father.